Something is happening in personal computing right now that has not happened at this scale in decades. Across forums, social media, tech communities, and increasingly in mainstream conversations, a growing number of people are doing something that was once considered extreme, impractical, or reserved exclusively for engineers and hobbyists. They are deleting Windows completely, formatting their drives, and installing Linux, not as a secondary system, not as a virtual machine for experimentation, as their primary daily use operating system. The numbers are still small compared to Windows' installed base of over 1 billion devices, but the trajectory is unmistakable. Linux desktop usage, which hovered around 1% for over a decade, has climbed past 4% globally and continues to rise. Steam, the largest PC gaming platform, reports Linux users increasing quarter after quarter. Linux-related search traffic has surged. Community forums are flooded with posts from first-time switchers asking for help, sharing experiences, and documenting their transitions. Something has changed. Not in Linux itself, though it has improved dramatically. Something has changed in Windows. Something that is pushing people who never considered an alternative to suddenly start looking for one. The question is whether this is a temporary wave of frustration that will subside when Microsoft addresses complaints, or whether this represents the beginning of a permanent structural shift in how people think about the operating systems they use every day. To understand why people are leaving, you first need to understand what they are leaving behind. Because the Windows they are abandoning in 2025 is not the Windows they grew up with. It is not the Windows that earned their loyalty over decades. It is something different. And the accumulation of changes over the last several years has created a breaking point for a segment of users that is larger than most industry analysts predicted. The most frequently cited frustration is forced updates. Windows 11 enforces updates on a schedule Microsoft controls. Home Edition users can pause updates for a few weeks, but cannot permanently defer them. When updates install, the system restarts, sometimes during active work sessions, despite configured active hours. Users have reported losing unsaved work, having long-running processes interrupted, and returning to their computers to find them rebooted without consent. For professionals who rely on system stability, for creators running overnight renders, for anyone who simply expects their computer to remain in the state they left it, forced restarts represent a fundamental violation of user trust. Telemetry is another persistent concern. Windows 11 collects diagnostic data and sends it to Microsoft's servers continuously. Even at the most restricted settings, some telemetry cannot be disabled on consumer editions. This data includes hardware information, usage patterns, application activity, and system health metrics. Microsoft states this data improves Windows and helps identify problems. But for privacy-conscious users, the inability to fully control what information leaves their computer is unacceptable. The operating system they purchased is reporting on their behavior to the company that sold it, and they cannot stop it. Hardware requirements have created resentment. Windows 11 requires TPM 2.0, secure boot, and specific processor generations. Millions of perfectly functional computers running Windows 10 are officially unsupported for Windows 11. When Windows 10 reaches end of support in October 2025, those machines will stop receiving security updates. Microsoft's recommendation is to buy new hardware. For users whose computers work fine for their needs, being told their machine is obsolete because it lacks a specific security chip feels like planned obsolescence designed to drive hardware sales. Cloud integration has intensified with every update. OneDrive folder backup enables by default during setup, syncing personal folders to Microsoft servers. Microsoft accounts are increasingly required, with local account options hidden or removed. Settings sync to the cloud. Activity history logs behavior across devices. Windows Backup uploads system configurations to Microsoft's infrastructure. For users who prefer their data to remain on their own hardware, Windows increasingly feels like a client for Microsoft's cloud services rather than a standalone operating system. Subscription pressure is growing. Microsoft 365 is promoted throughout Windows. Ads appear in the Start menu for Microsoft products. The free version of OneDrive has limited storage, encouraging paid subscriptions. Features that were once included with the operating system are being moved behind subscription tiers. Windows itself is not a subscription yet, but the experience of using it increasingly feels like one, with constant prompts to spend more money on Microsoft services. AI integration has added another layer of concern. Copilot, Microsoft's AI assistant, is embedded in the taskbar. Recall, the controversial screenshot monitoring feature captures and indexes everything on screen. These features require cloud processing and data transmission. For users who view AI integration as surveillance rather than assistance, Windows has become hostile territory. Each of these issues alone might be tolerable. Together, they create a cumulative effect. The feeling that Windows is no longer a tool that serves the user, but a platform that serves Microsoft. a platform where your data flows to their servers, where your attention is directed toward their services, where your hardware decisions are constrained by their requirements, where your computer updates and restarts on their schedule. And for a growing number of people, that feeling has become intolerable enough to seek alternatives. Linux has existed as a desktop operating system for over 30 years. It has always been free, open source, and technically capable. But for most of its history, it was impractical for mainstream users. Installation was difficult, hardware support was inconsistent, the interface was unfamiliar, software compatibility was limited, gaming was almost non-existent. Linux was an operating system for developers, server administrators, and enthusiasts who valued control over convenience. That has changed dramatically. Modern Linux distributions, particularly those designed for desktop use, have reached a level of polish and accessibility that would have been unimaginable a decade ago. Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Fedora, Pop! OS, and others offer installation processes that are as straightforward as Windows. You download an image file. You create a bootable USB drive. You boot from it. You click through a graphical installer that asks your language, time zone, and username. You click Install. 20 minutes later, you have a fully functional desktop with a web browser, Office suite, media player, and software manager ready to use. The desktop environments available on Linux are mature and visually refined. Cinnamon, the default environment in Linux Mint, looks and operates similarly to Windows. There is a start menu, a taskbar, a system tray, desktop icons, and a file manager that functions almost identically to Windows Explorer. Users switching from Windows often report that the transition is surprisingly intuitive. GNOME, used by Ubuntu and Fedora, offers a different workflow that is clean and modern. KDE Plasma provides extensive customization, allowing users to configure every visual element of their desktop. The variety means users can find an environment that matches their preferences, rather than accepting a single design vision imposed by the manufacturer. Software availability has improved enormously. Firefox, Chrome, Thunderbird, LibreOffice, GIMP, VLC, Spotify, Discord, Zoom, Slack, and hundreds of other popular applications run natively on Linux. Flatpak and Snap, universal packaging formats, have simplified software distribution by allowing developers to package applications once and distribute them across all Linux distributions. The software manager in most distributions provides an App Store experience where users can search for and install applications with a single click. But the most transformative change has been in gaming. For decades, gaming was the primary reason desktop users could not consider Linux. Games were built for Windows. DirectX, Microsoft's graphics API, was the industry standard. Linux had no equivalent ecosystem. That changed with Valve. The company behind Steam invested heavily in Linux gaming, motivated partly by concerns about Microsoft's control over Windows and its potential to compete with Steam through the Microsoft Store. Valve developed Proton, a compatibility layer that translates Windows game calls into Linux-compatible instructions. Proton has been remarkably successful. As of 2025, the majority of games on Steam work on Linux through Proton, many with performance comparable to or even exceeding their Windows counterparts. The Steam Deck, Valve's handheld gaming device, runs Linux natively and has sold millions of units, proving that Linux gaming is not just viable but commercially successful. Anti-cheat compatibility remains a challenge. Some multiplayer games use kernel-level anti-cheat systems that do not support Linux, but the situation is improving. Easy Anti-Cheat and BattleEye, two of the most widely used anti-cheat systems, have added Linux support. Game developers are increasingly testing on Linux because the Steam Deck represents a significant market segment. The remaining gaps are narrowing with each passing month. Beyond gaming and software, Linux offers fundamental architectural advantages. It does not include telemetry by default. It does not sync your data to anyone's cloud. It does not show ads in the interface. It does not force updates or restart without permission. It does not require an online account to use. It does not upload encryption keys to corporate servers. It does not run AI monitoring in the background. The operating system does exactly what you tell it to do and nothing more. For users who have been fighting Windows to protect their privacy and maintain control, Linux is not just an alternative, it is a relief. Presenting Linux as a perfect replacement for Windows would be dishonest and ultimately harmful to users who switch expecting everything to work flawlessly. The reality is more nuanced. Linux has improved dramatically, but it still has limitations and challenges that users should understand before committing. Software compatibility is the most significant barrier. While most popular applications have Linux versions or equivalents, some do not. Adobe Creative Suite, the industry standard for graphic design, video editing, and photography, does not run natively on Linux. Alternatives exist. GIMP for image editing, Kdenlive and DaVinci, Resolve for video editing, Inkscape for vector graphics. But these alternatives have different interfaces, different capabilities, and different workflows. Professionals whose careers depend on Adobe software may find switching impractical without significant workflow adjustment. Microsoft Office does not run natively on Linux. LibreOffice is a capable alternative that reads and writes Microsoft formats, but complex documents with advanced formatting macros or specific fonts may not render identically. For personal use, this is rarely a problem. For business environments where document fidelity is critical and where colleagues use Microsoft Office, compatibility issues can create friction. Some specialized software are industry-specific tools, professional audio production software, certain CAD applications, niche enterprise software exists only for Windows. Users who depend on such software may not find adequate alternatives on Linux. Why? A compatibility layer that runs some Windows applications on Linux can fill gaps in some cases, but it does not work with everything and can introduce performance issues or bugs. Driver support is generally excellent for mainstream hardware, but can be problematic for newer or more obscure devices. Wi-Fi adapters from certain manufacturers may require manual driver installation. Printers and scanners sometimes lack full Linux support. Fingerprint readers, IR cameras for facial recognition, and other biometric devices may not work. Users should research their specific hardware before switching to ensure everything is compatible. The learning curve is real but often overstated. For basic computing, browsing, email, documents, media, the transition is smooth. Most distributions are designed to be familiar to Windows users. But when something goes wrong, when a driver needs manual installation, when a configuration file needs editing, when a package dependency creates a conflict, the troubleshooting process often involves the terminal. Command line instructions that are natural for experienced Linux users can be intimidating for newcomers. The Linux community is generally helpful, with extensive documentation and active forums, but solving problems requires a willingness to learn and a tolerance for occasional technical complexity. System configuration is more exposed on Linux. This is both a strength and a weakness. You can customize everything, but you can also break everything. An incorrect configuration change can render the system unbootable. While this is recoverable, it requires knowledge that casual users may not have. Windows abstracts many system-level operations behind graphical interfaces that prevent destructive changes. Linux gives you the power to do anything, including things that damage your installation. These challenges are genuine. They affect real users. And they mean that Linux is not the right choice for everyone, but they are also diminishing with each passing year. Distributions are becoming more user-friendly. Hardware support is expanding. Software alternatives are improving. The community is growing and producing more accessible documentation. The Linux of 2025 is dramatically more usable than the Linux of 2015, which was itself a significant improvement over the Linux of 2005. The trajectory is clear even if the destination has not been fully reached. The movement toward Linux is not happening in isolation. It is part of a broader reckoning with the direction of mainstream computing. The major platform companies, Microsoft, Apple, Google, have all moved towards similar models. Cloud-first architecture, subscription revenue, AI integration, online identity systems, telemetry and behavioral data collection, managed updates, ecosystem lock-in. These are not bugs, they are the business model, and they are working extraordinarily well from a financial perspective. Microsoft's revenue from cloud services and subscriptions has grown dramatically. Apple's services division, which includes iCloud, Apple Music, and App Store revenue, is one of the fastest growing segments of their business. Google's entire model is built on data collection and advertising. All three companies benefit from users being deeply integrated into their ecosystems, because integration creates dependency, dependency creates retention, and retention creates recurring revenue. The trade-off is that users surrender control. You surrender control over when your system updates. You surrender control over where your data is stored. You surrender control over what information is collected about your behavior. You surrender control over which services are promoted and which are suppressed. You accept that the operating system will make decisions on your behalf, decisions that align with the platform owner's interests, which may or may not align with yours. For most users, this trade-off is acceptable or invisible. They value convenience. They appreciate seamless experiences. They trust the platforms. They do not think about telemetry or data sovereignty. They do not care about the philosophical implications of cloud storage, and there is nothing wrong with that. These platforms provide genuine value. They are polished, capable, and reliable for the majority of use cases. But for a minority, a growing minority, the trade-off is unacceptable. These are users who value autonomy, who believe that a computer they purchased should answer to them, not to the manufacturer, who want to know exactly what their operating system is doing and who want the power to change it, who see telemetry as surveillance, forced updates as overreach, and cloud integration as a threat to data sovereignty. For these users, Linux represents not just a different operating system, but a different philosophy of computing. A philosophy where the user is the administrator, the decision maker, and the owner. Where the operating system is a tool, not a platform. Where transparency is a feature, not a liability. This philosophical divide is becoming more visible as mainstream platforms become more managed. Every time Microsoft adds a new AI feature that requires cloud processing, every time Apple locks another service behind an iCloud subscription, every time Google collects another category of behavioral data, the gap between the managed ecosystem and the user-controlled alternative widens. And for users who fall on the control side of that divide, Linux becomes more attractive not because Linux is changing, but because everything else is. The word exodus implies a mass departure, millions leaving at once, a decisive shift in market share. Is that what is actually happening? The honest answer is that it depends on how you define the terms. Linux desktop market share has been growing. 4% of global desktop users represents tens of millions of people. That is significant. It is more than at any point in Linux's history. And the growth is accelerating, not plateauing, but context matters. Windows still commands roughly 72% of desktop market share. macOS holds around 15%. Linux at 4% is a distant third. Even if Linux's share doubled overnight, it would still be a fraction of the market. The overwhelming majority of computer users are not switching to Linux, are not considering switching, and may not even know what Linux is. What is happening is more nuanced than a mass migration. The people switching are disproportionately influential. They are developers who build the software others use. They are IT professionals who recommend and manage technology for organizations. They are content creators who share their experiences with large audiences. They are privacy advocates who shape public discourse around digital rights. They are enthusiasts who test boundaries and push adoption in their communities. When these groups move, their influence ripples outward. A developer who switches to Linux builds software that works on Linux. An IT professional who recommends Linux creates organizational adoption. A content creator who documents their switch inspires viewers to consider it. The impact of these switches extends far beyond the individual users involved. The Steam Deck effect is also significant. Millions of people are using Linux for gaming without even knowing it. They are discovering that Linux works, that games run well, that the experience is polished. This normalizes Linux in a way that decades of advocacy could not. When someone who has used Linux on their Steam Deck encounters frustration with Windows on their desktop, the mental barrier to switching is already lowered. They know Linux works because they have been using it. Community growth is measurable. Linux subreddits have seen subscriber counts increase dramatically. Linux-related YouTube channels are growing faster than the general tech category. Forum activity is up. Documentation contributions are increasing. Translation projects are expanding as non-English speaking users adopt Linux. The ecosystem is becoming more vibrant, more accessible, and more self-sustaining. Whether this constitutes an exodus depends on perspective. In absolute terms, Linux remains a small player in desktop computing. In terms of trajectory, influence, and cultural momentum, something meaningful is happening. The conditions that are driving users away from Windows, forced updates, telemetry, cloud dependency, AI integration, hardware requirements, are not temporary. They are structural. They reflect the direction Microsoft is committed to. And as long as those conditions persist or intensify, the incentive to seek alternatives will grow. The question is whether Linux can scale beyond enthusiasts and technically inclined users to reach a broader mainstream audience. The barriers are lower than ever. The software is more capable than ever. The community is more welcoming than ever. But the inertia of the Windows ecosystem, the familiarity, the software compatibility, the institutional adoption is enormous. Breaking through that inertia requires not just a better product, but a compelling reason to endure the friction of switching. For millions of users, the accumulating frustrations with Windows are providing that reason. Whether millions more will follow depends on whether Microsoft continues pushing in the direction it has been going, and whether Linux continues closing the gaps that still remain. What is unfolding right now in personal computing is not a sudden revolution. It is a slow divergence. Two visions of what an operating system should be are separating, and users are being asked implicitly to choose. One vision says the operating system is a managed platform, updated automatically, connected to the cloud, integrated with AI, optimized for convenience, secured by the manufacturer. Your data flows through corporate infrastructure because that is how modern services work. Your experience is personalized because that is what users expect. Your computer is part of an ecosystem because ecosystems provide value. This vision is not wrong. It serves billions of people well. It delivers genuine benefits in security, accessibility, and seamless experiences. The other vision says the operating system is a tool, controlled by the user, transparent in its operations, free from telemetry, independent of corporate infrastructure, updated when and how the user decides. Your data stays where you put it. Your computer does what you tell it to do and nothing more. This vision is not nostalgic. It is principled. It reflects a belief that the person who owns a machine should have ultimate authority over that machine, that transparency is not optional, that privacy is not a feature to be toggled, but a right to be respected. These visions are not entirely incompatible, but they are diverging. Windows is moving further toward managed convenience. Linux remains committed to user control. And the growing number of people switching from one to the other represents a quiet but meaningful vote about which vision they prefer. The exodus, if that is what it is not driven by hatred of Microsoft or fanatical devotion to open source. It is driven by a simple, deeply personal realization that the computer they are using no longer feels like theirs, that the operating system they trusted for decades now serves interests that are not aligned with their own, that every update pushes them further from the experience they want and closer to an experience designed to extract value from their attention and their data. Whether you are considering switching or not, whether you love Windows or tolerate it or have already left it behind, the underlying question affects everyone. Do you own your computer or do you access it? Do you control your data or do you contribute it? Is your operating system a tool you wield or a service you subscribe to? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They are practical realities that shape your daily experience with the device you use for hours every day. And the answer you choose, consciously or by accepting defaults, determines not just how your computer works, but who it works for.